Hey everyone, Paulus here. Welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to talk about why all entrepreneurs are liars. So did this title shock you? Hopefully it did, but my intention isn't to just suggest that entrepreneurs lie maliciously or deliberately, but rather that all business owners, myself included, lie to ourselves habitually. And if we can learn to see the truth of our situation, we'll be able to create amazing transformation in our business and our lives. So let's dive straight in and see what lies we have been telling ourselves. So over the last 15 years, I have had the opportunity to work with thousands of entrepreneurs. And it's interesting, like recently I've had some pretty amazing epiphanies that are kind of the no duh aha moments that we get. We're like, dang it, why did it take so long for me to figure this out? But for a lot of years, we did a lot of custom outsourcing for clients. So we take their things, the services that they need done, and we would build kind of custom processes to do it, and we'd fill on it. And then about a year and a half ago, I'd always preach that, hey, why are we reinventing the wheel? And so we started creating a lot of pre-built processes and solutions. And so every time we get a new service in, we create best practices around it. And that way, the time the next entrepreneur comes in, we're not having to reinvent the wheel, and the entrepreneur is not having to as well. But it's interesting, for a lot of years, I created kind of a one-size-fits-all solution. And as we've started to onboard more and more businesses, it's been kind of interesting to see that things are not one size fits all. We need different solutions and different things depending on the phase of business that we're in. So when we created this pre-built solution, it was interesting because it almost threw us back into what we call a validation phase, where we had to kind of test out that product and make sure that it was going to work for companies. But for a lot of years, I was like, oh, I'm a growth company. So you try to act like a growth company, but it's like we haven't even validated the product yet, right? And so this is something that we see a lot with a lot of businesses, is that we either think we're too far or farther along than we are, or that we're not being honest with the things that we should be doing right now in our business. And as entrepreneurs, we love to see shiny objects. We love to see all the different things that we want to do, right? We have endless ideas. But at the end of the day, we have to figure out, okay, what is it that I need to do so I can get this core product or this product that I'm launching through all the different phases successfully? And so that is kind of where I'm seeing a lot of just honestly dishonest truths that we're telling ourselves as business. And it was interesting, I sent out an email, and I wanted to test out this hook. All entrepreneurs are liars, because I didn't know if it would be harsh or people would, take it the wrong way. But it was interesting, when I said that hook, it was kind of a colder list that I sent it to, and the open rates were really good on it. And I had people replying back saying, hey, I agree with you, and that we need to be more honest with ourselves in business and what stage that we're in. And it was almost as if by me saying that, and that based on what I said in the email, it was almost like I was giving them permission to say, I don't have it all together. So there's a trend right now to be able to say, hey, look at me, like you think of the influencer world, right? We put on this facade that, hey, we got it all together, things are great, look at my family, look at me, look at all these things. But at the end of the day, we're all human, we all are making mistakes, and we all are still learning, right? We're never done learning. And that's the important thing to think about as you're digging into your business and the things that are really important for you to do right now. So I break down business into 3 phases: the startup phase, the growth phase, and the evergreen phase. I used to call it momentum phase, but then I was like, every stage needs to be in momentum. And I hated the word mature. That's usually what people would call the last phase. But I realized there's this trend to create a lot of growth companies and a lot of launches and just focus on cash flow, but nobody's really creating sustainable companies. So that's why I wanted to call it evergreen in that 3rd phase. And so I've been working on something that I've been calling the impact equation. And really what it is kind of an equation that shows you, based on the phase of business you're in, these are the things that you need to focus on. We have the ideation phase, where you're kind of coming up with a new idea and kind of creating a prototype and kind of testing that. And then we have the validation phase, where you need to really find your first 10 customers. You really need to validate your product with your ideal customers before you go and try to scale it. It's really important that as business owners, we think, oh, we have the best thing. And we think because we came up with the idea that everybody wants it. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. And the next phase is what I call the pre-scale phase. And honestly, this is probably the phase where the majority of my clients get stuck, and for a lot of reasons. They usually don't want to be honest with things that maybe they need to change about themselves, or they're not honest with maybe what they need to change in their business, or maybe they just don't even want to grow, and so they're scared to grow into that next level. So many reasons that we found that businesses really stay in that pre-scale phase. And so like in our company, we're determined to get people the tools to be able to get them out of that rut that they get in there. And one way to do that is really be aware of the speed bumps and the roadblocks that are ahead. And really, business is pretty predictable across industries if you just look for the patterns that we're all facing. And so it's really what I've done is taken all these patterns and putting them into this equation. So that's kind of the pre-scale phase where we see the majority of companies get stuck. And the other reason a lot of them get stuck is because they probably have missed steps in the prior two phases. They maybe haven't gone and validated the product. They're maybe struggling having employees because they don't have foundational, what we call purpose, values, and vision, or understand who their ideal customer is, or where those customers are congregating. Like, all those things are important to have lined out. I mean, we're literally working with clients right now where they're in the pre-scale and we're having to go back and start with their foundational elements because they're struggling just getting out of that next phase. So that's probably the biggest place that people get stuck and really lie to themselves of what really needs to be done. It's really not like malicious lying. It's just that we've been told by experts that everything's one size fits all. So we hear all this marketing and all these ads for what business solutions that are out there, and we think that it applies to us, but really we have to be pretty discerning to be like, okay, this is the phase of business I'm in, and these are the things that are important for me based on that phase. So after pre-scale, then we get into scale, and this is kind of where it's fun because we've kind of started putting together more of our team and our processes and our systems, and we're like, let's turn on the faucet. We figured out how to kind of bring in customers and how to market, and you can just kind of turn on the faucet and just kind of see what breaks. Now, but really what you want to do is really start creating a very sustainable company in that phase, and then start to move into the evergreen phase. And then really when you're in the evergreen phase, or what I call the first part of the evergreen phase, is the creative expansion phase. And this is where, you've created, let's say, your core product all the way through, and now it's pretty sustainable, it's kind of running, you started creating automations. But what's super important when you get to that creative expansion phase is to start doing product diversification or product expansion. Like, you always have to be innovating. I mean, think about all the businesses that Netflix passed up or Uber passed up. You know, the cabs are gone, the blockbusters are gone. It's because they thought they were invincible. They didn't realize that they had to keep innovating. And so as you get into that next phase, you kind of almost start back at square one with the new product, right? Now you're kind of back in ideation phase and you're working it all the way through for that product. And then the last phase is really transition. So even if you're not planning to sell your company anytime soon, I always think it's important to think about that transition phase throughout all of it, because you kind of begin with the end in mind. And that's, I think, gives you some clarity and just not getting stuck in the day-to-day of business and not being intentional with what you're doing. Okay, next I'm going to talk about innovation accounting to move the needle further faster in your company. But before I do that, I want to give you permission to say, I don't have it all together. So if you don't have it all together, in the comments say, I don't have it all together. Believe me, it'll be refreshing. And even tell me, or tell the world what you don't have all together. I think it's refreshing if we can all just tell what we're struggling with. And I'll go first in the comments. So if you want to see more videos like this, also click the notification bell. And I have a podcast starting it's called Pinocchio Talk. So it's about how all the lies we tell ourselves as entrepreneurs. Okay, so now let's talk about innovation accounting. I got this phrase from actually a book called The Lean Startup. And when I read this book, it was so refreshing because he talks a lot about startup strategies and a lot of the strategies that are wrong. But then he also says, it doesn't matter what size of company you are in, these startup strategies apply to you. So for me, I'm actually from the accounting world. It's actually good and bad that I have this accounting knowledge. Because on one hand, I learned about how to read financial statements, how to read a profit and loss statement, a balance sheet, a cash flow statement, and I can look at data and I can understand it. And so being a visionary, like understanding those data components are really good for me and being able to grow a company and being mindful of what's important. But the thing about accounting, traditional accounting, is it teaches you kind of react to data, right? You're looking at it after it's been done, so you're looking at a lot of historical data. And then also, I grew up in the business plan world where you need business plans, or if you go and trying to get an investor, they're like, give me a business plan. I remember going through this process of building a business plan. And at the time, they say to do it, this is how you be successful, right? So I went and I spent hours and hours creating business plans. And as I was building out projections and milestones, in my head, I'm like, this is all really garbage at the end of the day. Like, I have no idea. I don't have any baseline or any amount of data to be able to project what my numbers should be. And so that's why in this book, I loved it, because he literally threw the traditional accounting business plan. He didn't ever say the word business plan, but he talked about how projections are really just fluff. And it was refreshing to hear that, because we really have to, again, we're lying to ourselves. Again, we were taught to lie at an early age with our businesses because we're like, project numbers, even though we don't have any baseline. And so what's important is to actually do what he calls innovation accounting. So we really need to be asking ourselves, a lot of times people say, we're making the product better. This is the improvements we're making, but we're not really looking at the results and if it's really telling the right story. And so he talks about vanity metrics and how we come up, if you go into a boardroom and they want to know, hey, are you increasing your customers? We're like, yeah, look at our actual hockey stick growth curve that we have. We're onboarding tons and tons of customers, and they're just looking at the new customers that are coming in. But what's interesting is, let's say the growth on how you're going to bring in those customers all of a sudden stops. Like what's happening is, you're not really looking at the profitability of all those customers, but because the new customers are supporting maybe the bloat that's in the new customers, you don't really realize the bloat and the unproductiveness and the non-sustainableness that's happening in the back end of your company. And so it's really important to, as you're growing, to not only look at, hey, I'm bringing in more customers, but the data behind that. Because we can all go into a boardroom and say, yeah, look at how many new customers we brought in, and look at the growth curve that we have. But then when things shut off and the faucet shuts off, a lot of times all the underlying elements of your data is exposed. So for instance, for one company, I don't want to tell you these are the metrics you have to do. And that's, again, in the book, what they talked about was there's no one size fits all, that this is the data points that are the most important for you. Every business is different. So have those real conversations on what are the metrics and the data points that are most critical for my business and for this phase of business we're in. So let me just give you an example of 3 different growth points that might be critical for a specific type of company. So the first one is the profitability of each customer, right? It's not just, hey, we brought in this many new customers, this is the revenue for each customer, but how profitable are we on each customer? So if the growth curve stopped and you couldn't bring in new customers, could you sustain a company with the customers you have? The second is the cost of acquiring a new customer. If that cost continues to increase, it might get to where you might have to find other growth strategies to bring in customers. And the third metric that is an example is the repeat purchase rate of a customer. So again, just go into your company, understand what metrics are important. So you're not using vanity metrics that just make you look good on the outside, but at the end of the day, when you go and say, hey, we got to close down our company, or we got to sell our company off, there's probably different data points that could have triggered something sooner before it gets to that point. So let me just end with the 3 things that are around innovation accounting and what innovation accounting really is. The first is really coming up with an MVP, coming up with a baseline, right? If you can come up with a baseline of a minimum viable product for your company and then start testing that kind of gives you a baseline of data. And then what you can do is what he calls tune the engine. And that can get you to where you are now to where you want to go. And so you can kind of keep tweaking and keep tweaking. And that's kind of what we did with our model as we were adjusting. We kept tweaking and kept tweaking. We're like, well, that didn't work. Let's go try this. What's fascinating is you get to a point where you're like, oh, we're tweaking less. That means I think it's working now. We don't have to keep validating a new product. Let's go. And so now we're building big systems behind it, and so much because we're like, it works now. And so now for us, we can persevere with this model. But if that model didn't work that I was talking about at the beginning of this video, then we would have to actually pivot. And that's what we kept doing, is we kept pivoting until we got to where we had to pivot less. We're like, okay, there's a few minor adjustments, we're tuning it, but overall, we're there, let's go. So hopefully this video was helpful for you. I love just having real conversations with entrepreneurs. I think we're all tired of the fake that's on social media and that we're having to portray as entrepreneurs. And when we go to business events, we kind of got to puff up our chest and say, hey, I got it all together. I made this much in revenue. Let's just start to have real conversations. And that's really my whole purpose with this channel, with the community that I'm looking to build. So if you want to hear more about these different phases of business that I talked about, so the startup phase, the growth phase, and the evergreen phase, I'm actually putting on a clinic. So you can actually go to stressfreesupergrowth.com. And in this clinic, we're going to go deeper into each of those things and really understand what's important in each of those phases. So you can be like, oh, I identify with this phase, and these are the things that I need to be aware of. And so as entrepreneurs, we can maybe shut down a little bit of the shiny objects for a while and say, okay, got to hyper focus on these and make sure I'm getting this in place. So again, if you want to learn more, go to stressfreesupergrowth.com.